Hello and welcome to Real Chat. I'm Mark.
And I'm Sophie.
Today's classic review is a film released in 1985 which captured the hearts and minds of an entire generation. I first saw this film in 1986 and it completely won me over. But 40 years on, does The Breakfast Club still evoke the same emotional connection for modern audiences? Or do younger viewers see something very different beneath its iconic status? Our review coming up now. The Breakfast Club is a 1985 coming-of-age drama written and directed by John Hughes. The film follows 5 very different high school students, a rebel, a princess, an academic, an athlete and an outsider, who are forced to spend a Saturday together in detention. As the day unfolds, the group gradually reveal the pressures, insecurities and expectations shaping their lives. By the end of the day, they realise they may not be as different from each other as they first believed. Widely regarded as one of the most influential teen films ever made, the movie is still praised for its emotional honesty and memorable characters. But modern audiences often react very differently to some of its gender politics and relationships. So, over to you, Sophie. First of all, was there anything about this film that might appeal to a Gen Z like yourself?
I definitely think there are plenty of features in this movie that do appeal to Gen Zs like myself, particularly with the teenager aspects. Like, the teenagers that they're exploring in this film are not very different to today's teenagers. I think particularly with social hierarchies, that kind of thing hasn't really changed. There are still those groups of people you find who hang out with certain people who they're alike to. And you have the same kind of teen stereotypes that are very relatable still to this day, even though it's from the 80s.
What particular character might have resonated with you, do you think? Out of all of them?
Out of all of them. I'm not sure. I don't know if I really fit into any of the characters. Maybe more off to the Alison and Brian characters rather than the others, I think. Definitely not. A bit more nerdy. Yeah, maybe a bit more nerdy, I think.
And feeling slightly on the outside of things.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah, I've got to say, when I saw this 40 years ago, it was astonishing because somebody had made a movie for us, for teenagers. They were talking about their problems, sex, relationships, alcohol, drugs, pressure from parents, pressure from school. You know, the stereotypes were relatable. I know they're put into boxes to begin with, the princess, the rebel, and so on. But I think all teenagers could see themselves reflected to a certain degree in some aspects of the characters. Having said that, when I watched it again 40 years later with you, I had a different reaction.
Yeah.
My memory of the film was, it was so cool. It was great. It was absolutely perfect. I thought I was going to be in for a nostalgia fest. And yes, there was that element. Okay. But I've got to say how some of the characters behaved in the film. In particular, you know, the Judd Nelson, the John Bender, I think his name is. I remembered him as being, you know, really edgy and cool. And when I watched it again 40 years later, I had a slightly different impression. I thought, do you know what? This guy isn't as cool as I thought he was. You know, I'm not going to say much more than that because I want you to give your reaction.
I definitely think John Bender's character has aged so poorly, probably out of all of the aspects of this film, that has aged the worst. His treatment of specifically Claire, his just misogynistic statements, just constantly being abusive, all these things. And I just could not like him, no matter what. Even when you saw different sides of him, and he would open up about his home life or anything, you know, you felt bad to a certain degree, but I felt that in the end, his character's pretty stagnant. There's no like actual evidence of him learning from these other characters or himself at all. And yet he ends up with Claire, even though he doesn't really prove himself to her at all. She just kind of goes to him. And I didn't like that at all about the film. I think it was pretty misogynistic.
Yeah, I we saw him differently in the 80s. He was seen as, you know, I suppose that sort of bad boy anti-authority. He gets some of the good lines, you know, right at the start when the teacher comes in his best flares and jacket, that looking like he's stepped out of Saturday Night Fever. And Bender says to him, you know, does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe? You know, instantly you're kind of drawn to him. And he's the only person who's not dropped off in a car at the start. So you kind of think, right, he's maybe from an uncaring, poor background, possibly. And then there is that bit where he talks about his dad and the cigar burn on his arm and stuff. That kind of gives the sort of wounded animal kind of appeal. But I've got to say, I felt really uncomfortable with the stuff that he did with Claire. Yep. Everything he did was sexually provocative, you know, in what he was saying to her. I did find it uncomfortable. So apart from Bender, what about the other characters? How did you feel about them?
What I think this film really lacked was good character progression and development, because a major theme of this film is that the vice principal and the adults around them put them into boxes, and they weren't seeing them for anything outside of those boxes. And they themselves put themselves into boxes and put themselves into these social groups and don't feel like they can come out of them. And so you would expect them to try and break out of these. And you do see that in the film. There are plenty of moments where they do. But by the end of it, it doesn't seem like many of them have learned at all. And I mean, maybe that was the point. But it was disappointing to see that. I felt like the characters really hadn't changed much from the start of the film. And they were kind of back to the start. Other than Allison, who is like probably one of the most unique of them all. And she just ends up conforming, having the whole makeover, and gets with the popular guy. And I really didn't like that. Like, to have her change herself and then all of a sudden the guy likes her. And even though there was, you know, some hints of them liking each other or getting together, I felt like that was completely defeated by the end because he doesn't like her for herself.
Well, I'm going to push back about that. I mean, I think, yes, they start off as stereotypes, but I think they break that down somewhat with their vulnerability and that they open up to each other. Although I think they come to the realization that although they have separate labels and they are in different boxes, they saw that they had a lot in common with the pressures that they were under to conform. Certainly teenagers of my day sort of connected with that. We got this connection. We are teenagers and this is our film, you know? In terms of what happened to Alison at the end, at the time when I saw it, I felt that, hang on a minute, and I probably felt in a really shallow way that she was prettier as a goth, kind of, you know, an emo goth type. But when she got the makeover, I just thought something had been taken away. And certainly watching it now, 40 years later, I just thought that was an awful part of the movie because her identity completely depended on making her desirable and attracted to the sports guy, the jock. The film isn't perfect, and I think it does rely on, especially the ending, relies on those tropes where, okay, the boys and girls get together at the end, but the nerd character doesn't get a girlfriend at the end. I thought that was very fitting. Interestingly, the Molly Ringwald character said something that I thought was probably truthful. She says, on Monday morning, we'll just be back to ignoring each other and we'll all go our separate ways. And I thought, yeah, that's probably exactly what happened. But this is a movie and it can't end that way.
I think the first time I watched it, because this was a rewatch for me, I felt that the emotional scenes felt really inauthentic or forced. But when I rewatch it now, 2 years later, I think they fit in pretty well. And I do think that is probably the best part of the film, is how it really does connect with teenagers back in the 80s and in today. Like, they really do show that teenagers are important and they do have their own issues and adults shouldn't ignore them because they have their own feelings, they have their own lives. And even though they're still in high school, they shouldn't just be ignored. So I think that was a really good thing that the film included. And I really did love those scenes where they did all come together and communicate and open up. even though I felt like maybe some of them weren't really listening, like specifically Bender, I don't think he really cared what anyone else had to say at times. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think that was pretty well done, yeah.
And there was, it was of its time. That it just felt like some MTV moments. You've got the
Yeah.
you've got the Simply Minds, Don't You Forget About Me, and then you've got the dance sequence in the middle where they're all dancing together, and it just had a really kind of happy. We're all together despite our faults, despite our differences. One thing I had to say about this film, I don't know if you felt it. It was a perfect length.
Yes, I so agree. It was paced so perfectly. It is probably the most well-paced movie I've ever watched. It just worked so well. Every scene just fit like the exact right length, in my opinion.
It does. And it was like an hour and 40.
Yeah.
And I thought what was incredible about it was it took place inside a high school. And it was basically what was the 5 students and 2 members of staff, and they're all in this empty high school. And yet the film, I didn't feel bored at any point. They were just sat
really
there
entertaining
talking.
the whole way through.
And that is truly, truly commendable for any kind of film, even watching it 40 years later.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you watch older films, you think, oh God, this is dragging a bit.
Yeah.
Particularly with action movies, a horror film, really old stuff, feels dated and slow. And I just thought the pace was absolutely brilliant in this film. And it's still got some magic, I do think, even though some of the relationship stuff is problematic.
Yep.
Okay, so I think it's time for us to do the scores. So, Sophie, you want to grab your stuff? Here we go. Okay, here are scores for The Breakfast Club. I gave it an 8.
I gave it a 7.
And Sophie gave it a 7. Brilliant. Now, back in 1986, I would have given it a 10. But 40 years later, it's gone down 2 marks for me. Okay. But a very, very interesting revisit.
Definitely.
Really interesting to watch. Thank you, everybody, for getting this far and watching us. If you'd like to subscribe, please press the icon here. But I'd just like to say goodbye.
Bye.